Last week, we looked at Jesus reclining at the table, seated with the disciples. Now, we saw him kneeling in the garden, at the garden. We saw him kneeling, and practically he was alone because although the disciples were there, but they were not so near. They were a stone throw away from him. He was here because of the commitment that he is going to carry on what he has started and what he began what he emphasized that he is going to do his Father's will. So, the book of Hebrews tells us that in the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears. Although the Gospels did not mention about Jesus crying with loud cries and having wailing and being full of tears here, but the book of Hebrews, by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, the writer wrote this account as a summary that Jesus offered up prayers and supplications there. Of course, this is not the end, but the start, because in the cross also, he said many times, or he expressed many times about his cries, his loud cries of pain and struggles. So, this was the place where he experienced so much pain and agony. That's why when we are going to look into Gethsemane, we always associate it with Jesus' suffering in this prayer of agony. And in this garden, a few hours later, maybe an hour or two, Jesus was confronted. He was abducted by the chief priests and the officers of the temple and elders. But this is what he said in Luke 22, verse 53. But this is your hour and the power of darkness. In other words, he voluntarily opened himself to be vulnerable. He opened himself that you can now take me. This is your time. This is your hours. And the power of darkness. I was with you in the temple day by day, but you did not take me. But now is your hour. That's why it was a place of agony. He expressed to his disciples, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch. The same thing that Matthew recorded in Matthew 26:38, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Now, when he said, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death, he was so resigned that he could die because of so much grief here. He could expire. He could collapse and just die because he was so caught up with so much grief and sorrow, unimaginable sorrow. But the only recorded prayer that we can look or we can see in the scriptures as recorded by Matthew, Mark, and Luke, although Matthew repeated this in his account, is this prayer, which has a little difference in the other Gospels, but I would like to focus on Luke 22, verse 42. Father, if you are willing, let this cup pass from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. Father, if you are willing, let this cup pass from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. This is a short prayer. This is a prayer that expresses what was in the heart of Jesus. He said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And in this time of pain and trials and great struggle, he just cried this in a loud voice maybe that the disciples heard it at a distance, because this was the only record of what he said in his prayer. So there might be other words that he said, but this was the most audible that was recorded by the disciples who accounted this prayer. Have you been in a garden? In a garden, sometimes we have good memories in a garden. It is in the garden where we have our wedding. Do you have a garden wedding? In the garden, we have sweet memories. In the garden, that's the time that we can have relaxation, and it's just that we can rest in the garden. But this time, in the middle of the night, Jesus' memory of the garden was of pain and struggle. And in this particular prayer, we can see what was the focus in the heart of Jesus here. There are two focus or two traits of Jesus we can see in this prayer of agony. Number one, it is his firmness to submit to God's will. Firmness to submit to God's will And secondly, it was his tenderness for the souls under the wrath of God. His firmness was expressed here. In this particular prayer, he expressed his resolve. And through that resolve that he expressed, we see that he was really tough. And someone defined that toughness is not by our strong muscles. Toughness is not on our strong muscles, but in the strength of our soul and spirit. Because here, we can see that Jesus expressed how weak he was. He was weak physically. His humanity, his being a man through and through, he expressed here by the pain and the struggles that he expressed. Or else, if he has not experienced the pain and the struggles, we cannot consider him as a real man. Man will cry. Hindi totoo yun na ang tunay na lalaki hindi umiiyak. Si Jesus umiiyak. Tunay siya na lalaki. Sometimes we have this wrong notion, parents, to teach our children, don't cry. Boy, man should not cry. That's not true. They will be deceived to think that to be strong is not to express our emotion. Sometimes ganun ang ating pagtingin sa sarili. Pag nag-express tayo ng emotion is so weak. But we cannot accuse Jesus of being weak here, that he cried alone. Of course, he showed that he was man who feel the pain. Now, ang ating tanong this morning is, in this prayer, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Did he contemplate to change his mind? Was he reluctant to obey God? Did he express that, Lord, I don't want to follow you here? Now, that is why it is good for us to look on the other part of the scriptures in order for us to know. Because if we look at this alone, we might conclude that he was vacillating. He was not really contemplating to obey God. He questioned God. But we know in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, as summarized by the writer, that Jesus, he was weak, like us, in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. So, i-rule out natin na si Jesus was doubtful to his God, his Father here. I-rule out natin yun. Ever since that he appeared, maybe 3 years ago from here, he already expressed his intention to follow God's will. He always expressed it, even when he was lost, you see. When he was 12 years old, he was seen in the temple arguing with the rabbis, with the scribes. And the parents said to him, we've been looking for you. And he said, should I not be in my Father's business? In John chapter 4, he said, my meat is to do the will of God. And even in John chapter 8, for I always do the things that are pleasing to him. The writer of Hebrews also summarized his disposition to obey God by this. Behold, I have come to do your will, O God, as it is written of me in the scroll of the book. In verse 9 also, behold, I come to do your will. He does away with the first in order to establish the second. So Jesus was disposed always to follow the will of his Father. So what is in question here? What is in question when he prayed this prayer? Lord, if it be possible, remove this cup far from me. So the question is not that he was doubtful to obey the will of the Father. Now let me quote the writing of this pastor from Texas, Pastor Bob Diffenbaugh. He said, our Lord's submission to the Father's will is never a matter that is in question. If there is any question, it is what the Father's will is. Jesus was proving the matter of the cross with his Father to see if there was any other way to achieve the salvation of men. In other words, Jesus' focus in this prayer was not that I'm not willing to follow your will, but is this really your will? Is there something else? That's why when Matthew recorded Si Matthew lang ang nag-record na mayroong pangalawang prayer in Matthew chapter 26. And again, for the second time, he went away and prayed. Luke and Mark did not record this. My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done. Now, the word if there could be translated, and for as much as you want this. For as much as this cannot be changed, unless I drink it, your will be done, Lord. He confirmed by this prayer the second time that he was really has the intention and the focus to obey the Father's will. So the question was not his willingness. It was whether he was really doing the will of God. Is there any other way, Lord? And this determination of him to follow God's will, his resolve to obey God's will, was expressed when he rebuked the disciples about the temptation. He said in Matthew 26, verse 41, you see, according to Mark and Matthew, there were three instances that Jesus prayed. 3 instances. Ibig sabihin, Jesus prayed and he went to the disciples and disciples were sleeping. And he went again the third time. And every time he went to the disciples, he said, watch and pray. Could you not watch with me for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. What he said here to the disciples was a reminder for them that your flesh, did he include about his flesh? Yes. This flesh we have is weak. So we should watch and pray now, lest you will enter into temptation. Jesus recognized the weakness of the flesh. That's why Jesus can identify your weaknesses, your struggles, your pain, whatever you have right now, because he was weak as a man. Walang pagkakaiba yung katawan ni Kristo sa ating katawan, mga kapatid. Did he struggle for lust? Did he struggle for anger? Did he struggle for worry? I think the Bible tells us in every aspect he was tempted. Yet he did not commit any sin because he was in his weak body. He said to the disciples, watch and pray, please, because you might enter into the temptation. Take note, it's not temptations, not general term of temptations, but a temptation. What was the temptation? I believe that the temptation was that the devil, Satan, would prevent Jesus to receive the cup. The temptation is that the disciples might agree with Satan's temptation that there's no need for us to go to suffering in order to receive the glory of God. We can get rid of the way of the cross in order to receive the glory, isn't it? That was what the rebuke of Jesus to Peter. When Jesus began to say that he is going to die, Peter said, no, Lord, by all means, I'm going to protect you. What did he say to Satan? To Peter? Get thee behind me, Satan, for you always think of yourself, not the things of God. Peter and the rest of the disciples thought that the best way for them is to protect Jesus from suffering. They always dreamed that they can receive the kingdom without passing through suffering. Kaya nga mga kapatid, I think the same struggles that Peter and the rest of the disciples had experienced, pareha din sa atin ngayon. We want to become Christians, we want to be following the Lord, yet we thought that Christianity is devoid of suffering, devoid of pains and struggles. That's why when we have pain and struggle, sometimes we question our spirituality. Lord, did I commit wrong? Why I have these problems? I have this sickness. Why my children are this? Am I not in the center of your will? Maybe, Lord, you are punishing me. When it is the intention of God for us to be like Jesus, that we can be spiritual even we are going to pass through, in and through pains in life. Let us backtrack a little the history about this temptation. There was one time that Jesus was with his disciples, and there the mother of the two brothers, James and John, was there. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came upon him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom." Verse 22, Jesus answered, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" He mentioned about the cup. And they said, "We are able." Sa narinig ng 10, in verse 24, when the 10 heard it, they were indignant, they were angry at the two brothers. Why? Because they also want to sit at the side of Jesus. They didn't understand when Jesus said, are you able to drink the cup that I'm about to drink? Yes, we are able. That's why, makikita natin na when they were in the garden with Jesus, sa account ni Luke, ito yung sabi ni Luke, when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. Nakatulog sila for sorrow. It's not sleeping of sorrow, of pain, but sleeping for sorrow. What they were sorrowful about? I agree with John MacArthur's conclusion in this, that they were sleeping for sorrow because they did not get what Jesus said, and they just want to dream that the kingdom will come, and they were so sad that Jesus will leave them, and they will be helpless, they will suffer being by themselves without their leader. So they were dreaming for a life where they could be in the kingdom, and that's why they were so sorrowful that they cannot get it. And Jesus was right, because a few hours later, when the chief priest and together with Judas came in order to get Jesus, you know what happened? What Peter did. In John chapter 18, verse 10 to 11, then Simon Peter, having a sword. Dito ako nagtataka. Bakit nagdala ng kutsilyo si Simon Peter? Why is it that he brought a sword here? Drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me?" Again, he mentioned about the cup. Peter did not understand it, and the disciples also did not understand. When in fact, after this, the Bible tells us that all the disciples left him and fled. Practically, Jesus was left alone in the garden. After here, no more disciples. They were just following at a distance with Jesus. They did not understand about the temptation. The temptation was that Satan wants Jesus to withdraw and not to follow in taking the cup of sufferings. But Jesus was so mindful that, "Lord, help me to endure this, that I will not sleep. I will be able to follow you in your will here." Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7 to 8 is a great summary about this obedience of Jesus. In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. In verse 7, we know that Jesus' prayer was answered. Why? Because of this statement, the highlighted thing. He was saved from death. Isn't it that he said, "My soul is very sorrowful, even unto death"? And the Bible tells us that he was saved from death. Does this mean that he was saved from the death on the cross? I believe that this kind of death was not the same as the death of the cross. What he meant by this is that Jesus was so weak during the time that he prayed in the garden, that he could die there and not able to continue in his sufferings on the cross. And that is what I cannot understand also. I was looking into the web of some death inmates who are about to be executed. You know, mga testimonies ng mga inmates who are about to be executed through level or they are in a death row. Nagtataka ako, bakit ba na may isang nagtestimony dyan na when I was confined in this small room, there was little opening. I was given only a short and a t-shirt, lest I will attempt a suicide. Walang kutsara. He was given only a cup in order for him not to take his own life. But bakit ba na i-preserve yung life niya, maya-maya naman, patayin naman sila, ganun. You see, Jesus did not want to die prematurely in the garden. In his deep sorrow and grief, he could die there. But he said, Lord, please, let me not die here. And the Lord answered his prayer. He was saved him from death because he heard, because of his reverence, because of his godly obedience. That's why I like this. This guy, Jonathan Edwards, is a Puritan. This was what he accounted about the obedience of Christ. This was the greatest act of obedience that Christ was to perform. He prays for strength and help, that his poor, feeble human nature might be supported, that he might not fail in this great trial, that he might not sink and be swallowed up, and his strength to so overcome that he should not hold out and finish the appointed obedience. It was not just because Jesus was not committed to follow the way of the cross. He was so committed. But he was just so weak physically that he could die in the garden. That's why ito ang ginawa ng Panginoon sa kanya. In verse 8, although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. Okay, we're talking about his firmness here. Nga, i-emphasize dito sa verse 8 sa writer sa Hebrews, that Jesus was a son, yet he learned obedience. He embraced obedience. He learned to obey. It was not automatic, you know. Can you imagine God? Could he prevent himself from pain and suffering? Could Jesus appear like a man, but he could just pretend to suffer? He could just pretend and fake it? But no. He learned obedience through what he suffered. It means that he really was open for the attack of the enemy. I'm yours now. This is your hour, the power of darkness. That's why the account of Isaiah in Isaiah 50, verse 5 to 7, that he embraced really the pain here by his statement as Isaiah accounted here. The Lord God has opened my ear, and I was not rebellious. I turned not backward. I gave my back to those who strike, and my cheeks to those who pull out the bird. I hid not my face from disgrace and spitting. But the Lord God helps me. Therefore I have not been disgraced. Therefore I have set my face like a flint. What is a flint? It's a hardest rock. And I know that I shall not be put to shame. That's how Jesus was so determined to follow the will of God. The next we can see and focus in this prayer of Jesus in the garden was his tenderness. Tenderness he expressed through the pain that he embraced. It doesn't mean that when a person like Jesus, who is so determined to follow God's will, that there is no struggle, there is no pain. When in fact, ito yung problema natin, kasama ko dito. Pag nakikita natin that there is a struggle, there is a pain that we are going to about to engage and to confront us, doon tayo nagsishiver that I will not do it because there's pain approaching me. But Jesus was willing to embrace the pain. In this prayer, if you are willing, remove this cup far from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. He mentioned about the cup. Remove this cup far from me. What is the cup? The cup is a picture of the fullness of God's wrath. You see, ang cup, sa Old Testament, even today, I think, pag ginamit natin yung cup of wine, what is the symbol of it? It's a symbol of pleasure, right? Oh, let's celebrate. Let's have a cup of wine together. Oh, cheers. Thank we. The cup, I don't know what's the origin about banggain yung dalawang cup, ganun, but it's always a symbol of celebration and pleasure. Negatively, ito yung ginawa ng Panginoon dito or sa Bible, He turned it around to mean the fullness of God's wrath. Psalm 75 verse 8, in the hand of the Lord there is a cup with foaming wine well mixed, and He pours out from it, and all wicked of the earth shall drain it down to the dregs. Isaiah said, wake yourself, stand up, O Jerusalem, you who have drunk from the hand of the Lord, the cup of His wrath, who have drunk to the dregs of the bowl, the cup of staggering. Jeremiah said, thus the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me, take from my hand this cup of the wine of wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. They shall drink and stagger and be crazed because of the sword that I'm sending among them. But what is dreadful, mga kapatid, is what God revealed to John in the book of Revelation. There is a cup of judgment. He also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of His anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. So, the cup is a symbol of the fullness of God's wrath, and Jesus saw it coming. The cross was not only a physical suffering, but it was a suffering of separation from the Father, who was angry toward Him because He was not anymore a son on that cross, but sin. He who knew no sin became a sin for us. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. So that's how Jesus saw the coming wrath of God upon Him in the next few hours. That's why He was so sorrowful. My soul is very sorrowful. But, anong ginawa ng Panginoon sa Kanya? Ito lang yung account na may anghel. Sa Luke lang po na may account na may anghel na pinadala ang Panginoon. Matthew and Mark did not account it. There appeared to him an angel from heaven strengthening him. He was so weak. He prayed to the Lord, Lord, let me just push this through. I want to push this through as I was committed at the start. The Lord sent an angel to strengthen him. Here comes the Son of God, the Creator of the world, needs help from an angel. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Now, many commentators said that it might be that he was struggling so much that ang appearance daw ng kanyang pawis parang dugo. But there is a medical explanation that there is a phenomenon called hematidrosis. This is a medical term, hematidrosis. According to Chuck Swindoll, it is a rare but very real medical condition where one's sweat will contain blood. The sweat glands are surrounded by tiny blood vessels. These vessels can constrict and then dilate to the point of rupture, where the blood will then diffuse into the sweat glands. It's cause extreme anguish, according to Charles Swindoll. Kaya nga pwede siyang mamatay this time. Imagine nagbi-bleeding siya. And God has to help him through the angel. Why is it that he experienced this? Because he himself wants to embrace the pain, folks. He embraced the pain for us. He did not detour. He did not reject the confrontation, the engagement of pain. Kaya nga, pag sabi na dito, this is your hour and the power of darkness, He opened Himself to be vulnerable from the attack of the enemy. And in Luke chapter 13, verse 34, makikita natin, and now I'm looking into how Jesus was so tender. He was a weeping man. He was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, according to Jeremiah. How many times we can see that Jesus was a weeping person? Many times. When he went to, when Mary and Martha reported to him that Lazarus, his friend, was dead. In Luke chapter 11, di ba sabi niya, Lazarus is not dead. But 4 days na pala namatay na si Lazarus. Pagdating niya doon sa Bethany, he talked with the sisters. The sisters were crying. If you have been here, Lord, my brother could not have died. Then nakita niya yung mga nalulungkot na mga tao, no? He cried. You see, what made Jesus cry when Lazarus was dead? I don't think that the cause of Jesus crying during the death of Lazarus was not that Lazarus was dead, because he knew that Lazarus will be resuscitated. Nabuhay muli si Lazarus, pero namatay na naman siya muli, no? Na-resuscitate lang. I mean, he was not crying because Lazarus, he knew, will be alive again and will be with them. Ang dahilan, the cause why he cried is because when he saw the sisters crying, he can identify the pain. Nakita niyo magkapatid, umiiyak din siya. You see how Jesus can empathize to your problems and your grief and your needs and what caused you to cry can make him cry as well, because he can empathize with you. And this time when he announced for the 3rd time again that I'm going to die, he went to Jerusalem. And this is what he said, "Oh Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it, how often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing." He cried because he saw the city who rejected him like a hen that will cover them. Ang nakita niya dito is, many years from here, Emperor Titus of Rome in AD 70 will attack Jerusalem and literally burn the city flat to the ground. And people were just dying everywhere. Jesus wept. Luke 19:41, he saw the city and he wept over it. He is a man with a tender heart because he embraced pain, because he can see the wrath of God to the soul who will not receive his gospel, his grace. That's why when you go into the scriptures, we can see that Jesus was obedient just to what the scriptures have said. It is for the scriptures to be fulfilled. It is to be fulfilled that he is going to experience this pain. And let me just say this, that I believe that Jesus is familiar. He was so familiar about the prophecy about the Messiah. Familiar siya kung anong paghihirap na maranasan niya. Let me just read to you a portion of Isaiah 53 and the book of Jeremiah as well, about the possible passages, I believe that these are passages that Jesus might have in mind when he looked into the future, the next few hours, when he's going to undergo the pain at the cross. Isaiah 53 verse 3-6, he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised and we esteem him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. We esteem him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. Verse 5, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. So you see the picture that Isaiah drew here of the sufferings of Jesus. In Psalm 22, I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. These things are vivid in the mind of Jesus, I believe, that caused him in extreme anguish when he was praying in the garden. So you go back to Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7 to 8, as summarized by this writer. He prayed with much prayers and supplications, with loud cries and tears. And the Lord was able to save him from death, premature death, because he was reverential to God. He godly obeyed God. And although he was a son, by all means he has the right to escape from the suffering, but he learned obedience through what he suffered. So, let me just quote this statement from R.C. Sproul, a pastor, also a famous theologian in the States. He said that Christ exposed himself not only to the unbridled hostility of angry men. What do you mean by unbridled? Uncontrolled. But to the unmitigated wrath of God. What do you mean by unmitigated? Not moderated. Hindi moderate ng Panginoon ang wrath niya sa kay Jesus. He did not moderate it. He did not, it was in a full blast. What he expressed here is that the Lord, when he was angry at his son, not a son anymore on the cross, but sin, the full wrath of God, pinakita ng Panginoon sa kanya doon. He did it for you and for me because he was willing to embrace the pain for us. Because he was tender to your soul and to my soul, to the souls of the whole world, that we will not face this wrath of God. Kaya mga kapatid, mga kaibigan, if you are here this morning, don't just belittle the wrath of God. Yes, salvation is free. Yes, salvation is without a price for us. But it took Jesus to receive the full wrath of God in order for us to be free from the wrath of God. Sana po, kung sino man sa atin sa umagang ito, who might not thought about the wrath of God to Jesus, might consider the gravity, the seriousness that God is angry towards sin. Paano siya nagalit ng kasalanan? John 3:36 reminded us here, whosoever believes in the Son has eternal life. Whoever does not obey the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God remains in him. I hope that this will scare you. If I have if I will be successful in this message this morning to challenge you, it is this, that you should and I should be afraid that the wrath of God is coming. We heard so much about the grace of God, the love of God, the patience of God. But have we heard so much about the wrath of God? The wrath of God was on Jesus, and He embraced it. Kaya hindi natin dapat ibilito yung mga kasalanan na gawa natin. Every sin that we do is a drop of tear in the eyes of Jesus. Every sin that we do brings agony on Jesus on that cross. It's a reality. As I close, we remember the first garden. There was a garden that God created, the Garden of Eden. And in that garden, God created the first Adam. But you know what happened in that garden? When his wife Eve went to him bringing the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, Adam, here, kainin mo. Can you picture how Adam received it? In broad daylight, in his mind, he knew that this is something wrong, this is sin. Eve, this cannot be done. But his wife did it already. I don't know what he did, but maybe he just closed his eyes and said, I know this is wrong, but I have to take this. There was a garden where there was another Adam, the second Adam. He knew that the wrath of God is coming. He knew that he will receive the punishment, but he just closed his eyes and said, Lord, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. I will take this, Lord. Nevertheless, this is your will. The first garden, we fall. But in this garden, that's the beginning of our triumph over sin. Thank God for the second garden. Thank God for the agony of Jesus there. This is the beginning of his journey of pain that will culminate on the cross. My question for us this morning is, have we moved into this garden from Eden into the garden of Gethsemane? Have we trusted Jesus that what you did on the cross, what you did was a perfect sacrifice for my sin, and I can be free from my sin? You did it for me. And can we just be thankful of the sufferings that he did, even at the start in Gethsemane? How does his human vulnerability encourage us today? Do we dread the wrath of God towards sin as Jesus did? And how does the tenderness of Jesus to Peter and others affect us today? We are no different than Peter and the disciples, but Jesus was so tender to them as well. I hope that we can learn from that we are no different than them. Could you not watch with me for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you not enter into temptation. May we will grow strength by the grace of God, that ang kailangan natin is mag-pray talaga. Watch and pray. Let us pray.